Okay, we are having a discussion of two articles. The first one is Why Fear God? And the second one is called Should We Love God More Than, it says man, but I would say humans. And we just had a wonderful discussion, which I did not record, about, I asked the question, and for those of you who are, just listening on YouTube, I would ask you to think about the question, how would you describe your relationship with God? And we heard people talk about a sense of gratitude. Um, I would even say in my own life, it's a struggle. I struggle with the concept of God. There are times when I'm not sure I believe in God, but there's never a time when I feel like I don't have a relationship with God, which may sound a little perplexing. And that relationship can be one of powerful love and gratitude, and it can also be powerful anger and resentment. Um, and one of the things we talked about, and we'll get into the article in a second, is if we, only have a sense of gratitude toward God, in a sense, we're giving God credit for all the good things in our lives. And then the question is, I would raise is one of intellectual honesty, and that is that if you're giving God for the credit for good things in your life, should you hold God responsible for the bad things in your life? And that led to a discussion of certain things are a result of free will. You can have a bad thing in your life because someone decided to drink and drive and inflict damage on you and your family. But there's also um, tragedy, hurricanes, tsunamis, various diseases, which several of us discuss in ourselves and in our family. So interesting discussion. I apologize for not recording it, but at least those of you who are brave enough to share know that your sharing is not going to be on YouTube forever. So, Joanne, since I skipped you last time for reading,
Right.
and so we have this article, Why Fear God? And I think oh no, this one is by a scholar. I'm going to jump to the end. It's a distinguished professor emeritus and founder of the Jewish Studies program at the University of Waterloo. The other article is actually by a Orthodox rabbi. So, why fear God? Let's jump right into it.
We don't see it, Rabbi.
I'm sorry. Oh, you don't see it? Oh, I didn't.
No.
Okay. Thank you. I am not on my game tonight. Okay. So I presume you see
Here
it
we
now?
go.
Yes.
Okay. And let's see. Again, the article is Why Fear God? And Joanne, it'll be a little easier to read if you can actually see it.
Okay. The Torah does emphasize loving God as well, but there is at least an equal emphasis on fear. The concept of fear of God appears 5 times in Leviticus alone. Since Talmudic times, our sages have grappled with this issue and arrived at deeply insightful conclusions. Importantly, the Hebrew words Yirat Shamayim can mean fear of heaven, but also have other connotations.
So just, a little bit of Hebrew. Yirah is, I always translate it as a mix of fear and awe. This article is going to get into um, uh, other meanings or sensitivities as well. And Shemayim is heaven.
In Yirat Shamayim in Jewish thought, Warren Zev Harvey points out the term's manifold possibilities. He suggests that the concept is the Talmudic response to the Greek belief that freedom is achieved by freeing oneself from fear of the gods. Judaism, on the other hand, embraces the idea of fearing God.
So I'll just
Fear
point out the Talmud is later than the Bible. So this term Yirah and Yirat Shamayim, however we're going to translate it, is very much in the Bible. So I guess maybe what he's saying is in the Talmud, it is discussed more as fear, and it's a response to Greek thought.
Fear is viewed positively because it reflects an attitude. One's moral behavior is in one's control, and so one can choose moral virtues. If humans have agency in the moral realm, then we can choose or not to govern ourselves according to divine will. That means that it was really under discussion is better translated as an awareness of the divine imperative and respect for transcendent truth. Harvey notes that renowned Bible scholar Nechama Leibowitz considered fearing God a universal ethical principle, a regulatory ethical principle between individuals of different nations, and in particular between ruling nationals and the minorities. Similarly, the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas asserts that Yirat Shamayim does not refer to fear of punishment, but rather, in Harvey's words, a sobering awareness of one's infinite ethical obligations to other human beings, and in this awareness, God is revealed. According to Levinas, then,
It's actually Levinas.
Levinas, okay, sorry. Levinas, then the concept is as much about our relationship with one another as it is about our relationship with God. A modern reader may understand this emphasis on Yirat Shamayim as relating to a transcendent authority for moral and ethical behavior. We live in a secular culture where many are indifferent or even hostile to religion, and not without reason. Institutional religion has not covered itself in glory over the centuries. Furthermore, lack of religion does not imply a lack of moral and ethical values. Secular people can be as good as, if not better than, religious people.
And I will say that's an important principle for those of us who are, connected with religion, to acknowledge is that it doesn't guarantee good behavior. There are religious people who behave wonderfully. There are religious people who behave horribly, and the same thing with secular people. It's not a guarantee.
Maybe secular people have had an introduction to God but didn't know it.
I don't know what you mean by an introduction to God.
I mean, maybe they think God exists, but they don't really know it. They haven't really looked enough into it to understand it, but they have it inside. It's inside of them.
I would guess that the secular people that I know certainly have been introduced to God. They know about God through, our culture, and they think that the concept of God and religion is a silly superstition, which is unnecessary for explaining the world, both the good and the bad in the world. And
Right.
some of those people are very good, and some of those people are not so good. Sometimes the ethics of good, I would say, atheists or secular people, has been described as cut flower ethics, which describes it as, with religion, we teach ethics as an essential part of our religion.
Right.
And so people will say, well, I was raised this way because my parents raised me this way. Right. And I would argue that religion has a lot to do with that. A person who is a good person, because of his ethics, presumably would teach those ethics to his children or her children. But the question is, what's the source of those ethics?
Exactly. Where do the ethics come from?
Exactly. So does it, is it maintained? And then I will also always point out that there are ethical systems which don't hold with the idea, for example, that human life is sacred. So I would say communism doesn't have as a central principle the sanctity of human life. It has as economic principles as its core ethical structure. And the well-being of the state is paramount. And if you have a huge number of people who threaten the well-being of the state, it's perfectly okay to put those people to death because they threaten the central good, which is the well-being of the state, just as when we have an infestation of ants or whatever, I have no qualms about putting them to death. Alan.
So reacting to your comment, Baruch, about this concept that this person may not have realized that he or she had this awareness of God.
Right.
Reminds me of a story from Rabbi Janet Martyr, who says that when somebody says to her that they don't believe in God, she asks them how to describe the God they don't believe in.
Right.
And so that addresses to some degree, I think, Baruch, what you're saying.
Yes.
Is people the assumption in the conversation you're referring to. I mean, I think there's a way the rabbi described it that people never got introduced to the idea of God. But for the most people, when they get emphatic that they don't believe in God, they had to have some basis to actually to reach that conclusion.
Yes, and I have the same discussion with people, and so again, it repeats something that we discussed before I started recording the session, and that is whether people seriously think about and grapple with the question of what do we mean by God. And as Alan is describing, is if someone says they don't believe in God, I will ask them, as Rabbi Martyr does, and describe this God to me that you don't believe in. And often, I would say, the God that they describe is a very simplistic, old man sitting on a cloud, or
Right.
purely spiritual, hearing prayers, and maybe like Stephen wondering how God can hear those prayers in a vacuum. And we often hear some of the people in our Saturday morning Torah study, how is it possible that God can pay attention, to 7 billion people at once, and all of these things, which I would say is a very elementary description of the nature of God. And my reaction, like Rabbi Martyr's reaction, is, well, I don't believe in that God either. So then we can get into an interesting discussion of what we mean by God. And then the person can say, well, okay, I appreciate that description. I don't believe in that one either. But at least it's interesting to have a deep discussion about what we mean by God. I'm pretty sure it's Rabbi Wolpe who said you can love God and you can ignore God, but the greatest sin, no, you can love God or hate God. He says the greatest sin is basically ignoring God,
Right.
at least in Rabbi Wolpe's tradition. And
That's not
You have to
related.
excuse me. Sometimes I want to comment, but I don't know how to put the hand up there. I'll just raise my
we have a
hand.
small enough group so that if you actually do this,
Okay. Okay.
Baruch, if you go to where it says reactions on the bottom of the toolbar, do you have that?
No, I don't. Oh, here it is. It says
See it?
react. It
Reactions,
says
and then
react. Yes.
it will say raise. See where it says click
Oh, I
raise
see.
hand?
There it is.
Yeah.
I see it. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay. There, raise hand. There it is. Okay. Now I get it. Oops. Uh-oh.
No, Alan
I
raised
signed
his hand.
off.
You
There we
did that.
go.
Anyway, go
There
ahead,
we go.
Baruch.
Baruch is first. Yeah, please.
No, I'm not. I don't want to say anything. I just didn't know how to get the
Oh,
hand.
okay, Alan.
I may not be the sources, Rabbi Walpe, but I always thought you were going down the path that there are no atheists in foxholes.
Yeah, and I would say I would say that reflects the fact that we need to have a God. And I often, talk about various reasons why we humans need God, and why I would say belief in God is essential, but those don't prove whether there is or is not a God. Okay, so Joanne, you want to continue? I think we're right here at
Yeah, but a wholesale rejection of religion invites a world of self-centeredness, a lack of the ethical core that was born of religious teachings. The fact that religious institutions have often not lived up to their own ideals does not undermine the value of those ideals. The Torah's mitzvot are not nullified because some of its practitioners betrayed the message.
Yeah, and a very common commentary along these lines is, if you have an unethical doctor, it doesn't teach us that medicine is unethical or not true, or we should not go to doctors. It's the human that is unethical. Okay, let me roll this up.
Okay, Parshat Shoftim commands a king to write 2 Torah scrolls and to read from them every day, so that his heart not become haughty over his brethren. At a time when pharaohs considered themselves gods, this is an extraordinary demand. The purpose is that the king be reminded that he is not a god and that he treat others as commanded in the Torah, giving all citizens respect and dignity. With no fear of God.
Politicians should pay attention to.
Okay. With no fear of God, with no transcendent and eternal moral values, people have no barrier to committing whatever evil they want. Instead, other fears take its place. Conspiracy theories in which dark forces try to control the world and fear of the other, those unlike us, lead to racism and anti-Semitism.
Right.
Rabbi Bradley Shavit Arson points to an instructive detail in the Moses story. Pharaoh orders the midwives to the Jews to murder Jewish newborn boys. He was the mightiest of tyrants, but the midwives, fearing God, did not do so as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. How could they exhibit such extraordinary courage if they didn't believe more in the eternal power than the temporal one? Interviews after World War II with the righteous who saved Jews in Europe revealed that many did so because they were religious Christians who were guided by spiritual and moral considerations. Like the midwives of Egypt, they made the only possible choice to save life instead of allowing it to be destroyed.
Yeah, so I mean, I love the fact that the author presented both of those ideas one after the other, because really in both of them, both in the midwives in the story of Exodus, and in the stories of Christians who hid Jews, you have people who violated the law. So what they were doing was clearly illegal, and they subjected themselves and their families to death for the actions that they took. And so the action that they took was out of, I would say, Yirat Shamayim or Yirat Hashem. And so I don't know that I would describe it as fear. And I'm curious as to how you might describe. I mean, again, I like to think of Yirah as, I think of it as 2/3 awe and 1/3 fear. I mean, that reveals my mathematical inclination. And I often think about it as you're standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and there's no fence. And it is awesome, but it's also scary. Um, so the people that were hiding Jews in the Holocaust, the people that hid Anne Frank and her family, did they do that because they were more afraid of being punished by God than punished by the Nazis? I wouldn't think of it that way. I mean, I would think of it that they felt commanded by God and they felt responsible to God and in awe of God. But I don't know if you would comment on that. I don't get a sense that even though the text, the midwives, the text. So this is Exodus 1. It's a story of Moses, and Pharaoh gives an order to kill all the baby boys. Gives the order to the midwives, and they basically refuse to do that. Alan.
So am I muted? I'm okay, right?
No,
okay.
You're good.
Yeah. So this raises a question in my mind about values and laws, because most people mean well when they do things. There's a set of people who don't mean well, but let's use, and I apologize if this feels too political, but I believe that the people who behaved on January 6th that were violating the United States Constitution laws felt that they were doing something for goodness for their values, let's say, or even America. They're, even breaking America's own laws. And so I'm kind of wrestling with the how one actually does use their free will in a smart way, because I like to think I know what Jewish values are, but I've had that argument with somebody once.
Okay, I'm going to comment on that, but first I'm going to call on Baruch, who has successfully raised his hand.
I'd like to say, and you touched on it when you talked about the Holocaust. I wonder, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if anybody really does know the answer. Do the people who were in charge of hurting and killing the Jews and destroying them have any sense of religion or God inside their body? Do they know that they're destroying something that's very sacred? I don't know if they did or not. And if they didn't, where is that hiding inside of them? I mean, how are they raised? They must know something about it.
Okay, so it's a very good question. And I absolutely agree with Alan that I would say most people, we don't have Cheryl with us. We don't have a psychologist with us, unless any of you are psychologists.
They all went to the World Series, I think. The psychologists.
Sorry?
All the psychologists are watching the World Series.
Yes. So I think by and large, most people think that they are basically good. And I agree with you. And so the question then is, how do you define good?
Yeah.
Is killing Jews good?
Yeah,
Put it
exactly.
bluntly.
Yeah.
And I would say, if you look at Jews not as created in God's image, like other people, but as vermin, poisoning, to use Nazi vernacular, poisoning the bloodstream of our nation. Hard to imagine that anyone would ever use that same kind of vernacular, but maybe they do. If you view that as being good, then killing Jews was good. If Stalin wanted to collectivize the farms of the Ukraine, and basically because the highest good in communism was national ownership of the means of production. That was the ethics of communism. The farmers who owned their own farms and grew up on these farms, and they've been in the family for years and years and years, didn't think it was good for them to have to give up their farms. So Stalin starved 5 million Ukrainians. But I'm certain he was doing good. It certainly was legal. Everything that Hitler did was legal. So the question is, there are two principles, and I get this from Prager and Solushkin in the book called the 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism. Points out two things. If there's no God, there is no objective good or evil. We each have our opinions about good and evil, and they may be as dramatically different as, I think killing Jews is good, and another person would say it's evil, or starving Ukrainians. But we could also, we can have reasonable opinions about whether eating animals is good or evil. Okay,
Right.
So without God, or without an extra human source of the definition of good and evil,
Right.
all we are left with is public opinion.
There you go. That's
And
right.
I certainly don't trust public opinion.
Yeah.
Now, there's a problem in that different religions teach different principles, and that is a problem, which is why my own definition of what a kosher religion is two things: that human life is sacred, and we should do to others what we want to have done to us.
Right.
Golden rule. By the way, the second principle, and I'll mention it, is without God, there is no intrinsic meaning to life.
Right.
If you take God out of the equation, then we are an extraordinary biochemical physics accident of creation, which is astoundingly improbable.
Right.
And the way I usually present it, somewhat dramatically, is here's a piece of paper. If I burn this piece of paper, I get some energy, I get water vapor, I get carbon dioxide, and then the minerals in the paper are left over as ash. If I take a living baby and burn the baby alive, I get some energy, I get some water vapor, I get carbon dioxide, and the minerals that are in the baby's body are left over as ash. So speaking biochemically, there is no difference between burning babies alive and burning waste paper. I refuse to accept it. I can't prove it, because I'm not speaking about whether God exists or whether religion is correct, but I refuse to live my life as though there is no objective good and evil, and that there's no meaning to life. We may infuse our
That's
life with
exactly
meaning.
right. That's exactly.
If I play a video game, I'm excited and into the game, but there really is no meaning in that game. So the question is there meaning in my life? Or am I just, like an ant on an anthill without, not to denigrate ants, without, intrinsic lasting meaning? And certainly I would say Judaism, particularly as you get into mysticism, supplies astounding meaning to life, that literally the universe depends on how we act. Stephen.
If you burn a baby alive, I would assume it's the same as if you burn an adult alive, that what you're left with that you call ash is actually bone fragments.
Yeah, I said
and
minerals. The minerals are left, right?
right.
The
But
non-
anyway, what you have after a cremation that people call ash, it's not really.
I
And now,
know, Stephen,
yeah,
but what's the relevance of that comment?
it's actually pieces of
Yeah,
bone.
it's calcium carbonate, which they have to grind up. I know. I've actually witnessed a cremation, and I've participated in burials of cremation and scattering of cremains, as it is called. Alan.
Going back to Baruch, sorry, you're my source of lots of ideas for talking tonight, so thank you.
Sure.
On this subject of the Germans and what they thought of, I agree with the rabbi's response, actually, but then it leads to the following thing about how uncomfortable some of them were, even though they were doing something technically legal, but is what the
Yeah,
government can do is Stalin.
I would
And
think that. I would think so too. Yeah.
two examples that are on my mind is I was in a class with Rabbi Rebecca Rosenthal at the Central Synagogue on the letter, George Washington's letter to the Jews. And in that subject, which praises the Jews in 1790, you can read into the fact that the founders of America, even though that they wanted a country with people who could, in the case of freedom of religion, but a lot of things that were an improvement over England, because that was where they were from. And most of them are the origins of the language of the country. And so I'm drawing this picture of each of our individual challenges we have, because none of these countries, the colonies weren't, and our country certainly isn't. And England probably was better than some places in the 18th century. But as individuals, now we're faced with making value choices, and we are under the environment of some or imposition of government too. And so your point about the German Jews it reminded me about these other aspects of different ways that people can influence their government, as we're about to do on Tuesday, that reflect what are important to each of us.
Absolutely.
Baruch, yeah.
I don't know if is it okay to go at this point? I have my hand up there.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes I will read a book. It doesn't have anything to do with the words in there, but when the words are put together and they form a whole, I think it's godly. What happens when a person does something good to somebody else? Like helps them to survive, or helps them to feel better, helps them to get something they need, and they can't get it any other way but being with you. Is that a feeling of God inside of you? I feel God in there when I do something good for somebody. I feel a sense of good in there. So that's what God means to me. It means,
and by helping that person, I
Yeah.
assume you don't mean killing them.
no,
Okay.
no,
No, I'm serious.
I don't mean killing them.
Because presumably the Nazis and the communists thought they were helping their fellow man by killing Jews and Ukrainians. So they thought they were doing good. I don't know if they felt as though they had a sense of God. I will point out that all of the concentration camp guards were volunteers. No one in Nazi Germany was forced to be a concentration camp guard. Having said that, it was probably pretty good duty compared to going off and, on the Eastern Front and marching into Russia during the winter and trying to conquer Russia. So it was good duty, but they were all volunteers. And there's an experiment I talk about almost endlessly called the Milgram experiment, which basically says under the influence of authority, average Americans are willing to torture other average Americans.
That's right.
So I would say we have in our nature the ability to do good and to do evil. And I think Judaism has it exactly right, speaking of what is called the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara.
Right.
And the influence of God is to presumably lead us away from the bad things and lead us toward the good things. But I agree with the central point, which I think, Alan, you made. I think most people think they are doing good things. And that's why I would say we need religion, and we also need government. I mean, Judaism absolutely affirms the idea that we need government. And actually in the next article, which I don't think we're going to get to tonight, talks about the principle, it's a Talmudic principle, and in Aramaic it's called Malchuta Dina Malchuta, which means the law of the land is the law. And Jews are obligated to obey the law of the, no, maybe it's not in that article, it's in a different thing I read about. Jews are obligated to obey the law of the land unless it conflicts with Jewish law and Jewish principles.
That's in the Talmud, right?
That is
No?
Talmudic, yes. It's Aramaic, yes. Okay.
I just want to say, I think it's really difficult, when you have a leader who, like what happened on Capitol Hill, I mean, it just seems there's a certain stamp of approval to go ahead and behave like that.
Right. So the question is, do you obey the leader? And I'll stay away from politics. Do you obey Hitler?
Right.
Or do you obey your conscience?
Yeah.
So I would say in Germany, most people obeyed Hitler.
Right.
And a few people obeyed God. And that's kind of what they're talking about in these two, paragraphs about Christians saving Jews. And so I would say most people obey authority and not necessarily their conscience when push comes to shove.
Yeah.
Baruch and then Alan.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that experiment you quoted, in that experiment, the operator of the experiment, or
you're a psychologist, I think.
Yeah, the advisor of the experiment was leading the experiment by saying, you must do what I'm telling you to do.
Right.
This is what you must do. And even if it hurts the person, you must keep doing it. And they kept doing it, even though it hurt the person behind the glass.
Right. Even though the person begged to be let free of the experiment.
Yes,
became
exactly
silent.
right.
So presumably either they had passed out or died. 65% of the people actually went to the maximum level of voltage and pain.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
They went to there because somebody in authority told them to do it.
Right.
And they did it.
So the question there is exactly the one that's posed here is, do we obey authority, presumably human authority, or do we have Yirat Shamayim?
Exactly.
Fear or awe or obedience to God. Alan.
Just wanted to add the factor of psychological influence or conditioning. So one of the things that Hitler was good at, and other dictators, probably Stalin was also, was to get the attention of the people, and then remind them what the government was expecting of them. And it placed, obviously, for the people we're referring to, a tension between feeling like it was wrong and so forth. But the issue wasn't, as I listened to this last aspect, it sounded like an intellectual discussion of a bunch of people put in a room, part of this experiment. But it's much different if it's your life and your children, survival, and your government, and it's happening to you every day on the radio in Germany. At some point you say, well, I'm just going to do what the Germans do, and I'm not going to, I didn't like this idea, but now I'm going to salute it. And the psychology in it is very important, and military too. I have some examples from Vietnam too, but they would encourage that. Mm-hmm. So that it's not as simple as starts being simple, but the wisdom or the brilliance of the leaders who want you to behave in a crazy way, it has a psychological process that takes a lot of attention, and they do it very well.
I will just point out why I'm obsessed with the Milgram experiment.
Okay.
Are you familiar with it, Alan?
No, okay. I might tell us.
I mean, I talk about it a lot, but it is on a, I think it was at Yale University. And it's just people sitting in a experimental setup, and the 65% of people were willing to inflict pain to the point of unconsciousness and possible death to the other volunteer, another New Haven resident, simply under the influence of a guy in a white coat with a clipboard saying the experiment requires you to do this. When, of course, he didn't have a gun. He didn't have the authority of the military. The person could have just said, no, I refuse. This is unethical. I'm not going to do it. And 35% of people may have done that, but 65% didn't. So I adore psychological experiments and the way they are able to eliminate other variables, to the extent possible, to test specific points.
Right.
There's another whole experiment called the Stanford prison experiment, where over like winter break or something, in Stanford University, they modeled students arbitrarily assigned to either be prison inmates and prison guards to see how they would behave. And the experiment got way out of control. The prison guards were incredibly brutal to the inmates, and even beyond that, the guards and the faculty who was supervising this got wind of the fact that the quote unquote prisoners were planning a prison break. And so they contacted the local police and asked them, how do we prevent a prison break? And they clamped down. And then that actually, one of the things that led to stopping the experiment, because the professors who were conducting the experiment realized that they got drawn in to it.
That actually was one of their wives that realized it and pointed it out to them.
Yeah. So however it became aware, but they realized the experimenters, who presumably should be neutral and watching, got sucked into the role of being the oppressors. So I would say, to me,
I think it was one professor, and he was playing the role of the warden who was in charge of the guards, not playing the role of a neutral.
It's very interesting. I mean, you can find a lot of material online about it.
One thing I'd like to say is that I don't know if anybody, I'm sure people have been to the Holocaust Museum down in Los Angeles, but where they take you first is to this room, and they have a table and you sit there, and then they have a speaker. What I mean by speaker is that every table had a little, like a radio on it, and you could hear words coming out of that radio. And the words were pretty uniform. They went to every place that had a table, and they were brainwashed into following the orders of the person who was talking on that radio.
Right.
And they followed it. And not even knowing why they were going to follow it, they followed it. They heard it enough times.
Well, it's what Milgram proved was that it's the influence of authority.
That's right.
One of the things he did was to also test the same test under different conditions. If it wasn't in a university laboratory, but more in an office setting, you had fewer people doing the torture. If a person who was administrating the electric shocks had seen other people quit and say, no, I'm not going to go that far, then only like 5 or 10% of the people would go to the maximum shock. So he varied it in very interesting ways. And by the way, women and men had the same outcome. You would think,
really,
you might think that women would be less.
You think they'd be more accepting, and they wouldn't want to do it because they would be they'd feel bad.
Well, it's not necessarily a representative sample. It's the people that were willing to participate in the experiment to begin with.
Well, they were just asked to participate in a psychological experiment, and they thought they were drawing out of a hat who would be the teacher and who would be the learner. So the Stanford experiment had that. The Stanford experiment had that critique that people knew what they were doing, so there might have been a predisposition. Anyway, let's see if we can finish this article. Joanne, in The Great Partnership.
In The Great Partnership, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explores the idea of religion as essential to society's moral and ethical functioning. He points out that what made Abrahamic monotheism unique is that it endowed life with meaning. When a society loses its religion, it tends not to last very long thereafter. It discovers that having severed the ropes that moor its morality to something transcendent, all it has left is relativism, and relativism is incapable of defending anything, including itself.
Everything breaks apart.
For Sacks, it is an optical illusion that we can abandon belief in God and leave nothing unchanged. The ramifications of a civilization without religion are profound. We live in a complex, quickly changing world with countless preoccupations and concerns. It is easy to dismiss religion without realizing that its loss only compounds the problems of our troubled world instead of healing it.
Wow.
So, I thought this was an interesting article. I'm not sure it really addresses the question of why fear God, but I would say it does address the issue of why be bound to God and God's teachings. I don't know that the article really, addresses almost the psychology. Is the relationship one of fear or one of loving obedience? I have this kind of private theory that one's relationship with God and attitude toward God is influenced by their relationship and attitude toward their parents. This, for me, is completely anecdotal. I would say I feared my father, but I very much loved my father and wanted to shine in his eyes, and I wanted him to be proud of me. I will never forget very early on in my marriage to Carol, my older brother had a baby, and they were going to have a circumcision, a big party to celebrate the birth of this baby. And I was actually in graduate school at the time, and I had grown a beard, and it was kind of just a very scruffy beard. And so I went back to New York for this great celebration, and my father said, "Shave your beard. I really don't like the way you look with your beard." And I shaved my beard. I mean, what was the big deal? My father wanted me to shave my beard. I could grow it back. It grows every day. So I shaved my beard. And actually, I think Carol was upset with me for not sticking to my guns, and other people who I discussed this with were upset. But I did it out of love and respect and gratitude toward my father. For me, shaving my beard was a pretty minor concession. Alan.
In your example of the influence of parents, wasn't the influence of religion or God, it was just general respect for your father or the parents, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
not, because I thought you might have gone in a different direction about.
So actually, the direction I was going in is purely anecdotal. The people that I meet and have discussions about God with, and there's a lot of them, if we get into the question of what was their relationship with their parents, the ones that are, I would say, not terribly respectful of the idea of God, and I would say, and dismissive and antagonistic toward the idea of God, it just strikes me that often these are people that didn't have good relationships with their parents. It's purely anecdotal. I don't know if.
Oh, no, it's okay. I have 2 points that are going through my mind. One is I have an 80-something friend when she says she's an atheist, and when she's asked why, with great emphasis, and she'll repeat it 10 times, it's because her father was an atheist. And she doesn't have at 85, doesn't have an independent assessment that she can respond to. The other thing that I credit to myself is that I credit to my father is that my father was raised Orthodox, and he and my uncles, he and his four brothers all rejected, went away from Orthodoxy. And so I give credit to my father because I didn't have to give up Orthodoxy. I started out being
right.
Reformed. So, I mean, I am influenced by my father, although he wasn't doing very much, but I'm using these examples, trying to support your point, actually.
Yeah, and I would say I'm Jewish because my parents are Jewish. And that is both a statement of halakha and a statement of reality. I mean, I don't think if my parents were Buddhist or Christian that I would necessarily go toward Judaism.
If you found out now that you were adopted and weren't really Jewish according to halakha, would you remain Jewish, remain a rabbi? Would you convert? I guess
I would. The answer is I would convert and remain Jewish and remain a rabbi.
I just wonder, I know we're almost out of time, but have you ever heard, when I first joined Chabad, I heard this theory, and I don't know if anybody else has heard it. This is called the vernal. It's part of your lip, and it goes up to your nose. And when you're born, God comes down and blows all the Torah into your nose, and it goes up to your brain, and that's where it stays. You have all this knowledge to begin with. That's how you live. You have inborn knowledge. That's how I figured it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how
So
I learned. I never heard it till like 10 years ago that I heard about it.
So the version of that I heard actually is quite different. And that is that before we're born, before our soul in heaven enters a body to be born, which is reincarnation, okay, and that's Chabad and Kabbalah,
Right.
Hasidic Judaism and Kabbalah.
Right.
An angel shows us the entire world. We know the entire Torah. We know what our path in life is going to be. We know our past lives and everything else.
Right.
And then the angel touches us right here.
Right there,
I think it's called the Philium, but I might be misremembering that.
Could be.
And then we forget everything. So interestingly, it's a similar story. And I don't know if your teachers have a different version of the story or not, but I can certainly tell you I don't know the entire Torah and even close.
That's funny.
I'm much more willing to believe that that knowledge was taken from me before I was born than given to me.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. But there is absolutely it's a mystical teaching.
Are we talking about what, if I'm connecting what Baruch is saying, in Torah teaching that God, like talk about Moses, the breath from Moses and the end of Moses' life, that we're described the function of being alive has to do with the breath as we receive from God.
So in the Garden of Eden,
it's beautiful. I like that's beautiful.
In the Garden of Eden, it says God breathed the breath of life into Adam, and he became a living soul, a living nefesh, a living being.
Yeah.
But it doesn't directly speak to this question of that you get or forget Torah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you all. And next week we're going to read. We'll discuss the next article, which I think is actually quite good and quite interesting, on the subject of should we love God more than man? And it actually is a deep dive into the Akedah, the near sacrifice and binding of Isaac. So it's very, very interesting, I believe.
This was nice. This was good. I enjoyed this. This is very good.
Thank you. Okay, play ball.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.